about one of my dear friends and one of my most respected colleagues, and I think in many ways someone that I think of as a mentor, Mr. Bruce Maller of BSM Consulting. Now, we have done this year about a dozen partner webinars with people that we trust and respect who are advising medical professionals in various areas. And I'm excited to close out our year of partner webinars by inviting Bruce here to talk with you all about strategic planning considerations. This is an incredibly timely topic. I know many of our own clients are on the call today and are engaged with us in discussions around strategic planning for 2015. And it's a tough thing. It's hard to be both exceptional in medicine and exceptional in business. And hopefully today, both for the doctors who are able to join the call as well as the professional administrators, you're going to take something away that's going to make you feel more confident, more effective in your strategic planning for the next calendar year. For those that don't know Bruce, he is the president and the CEO of BSM Consulting. They're a global healthcare consulting firm. Bruce's experience goes back over 30 years. He's advising practices, medical device manufacturers, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, healthcare networks in strategic planning, financial planning, benchmarking, mergers and acquisitions, business valuations. I think it's especially fascinating the work that he does in succession planning, as well as business development. And Bruce is going to spend about a half an hour with us reviewing some key concepts, and then we'll continue to the end of this hour with your Q&A. So that said, Bruce, I'd love to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate that. And I'm grateful for the kind invitation to participate in today's session. When Ryan and I spoke about today's session, we focused on the fact that many of our practices may struggle a bit in setting and achieving clear goals. And when I think about this, my view of that as a small business owner is that we're all very busy managing the day-to-day aspects of taking care of patients, and few have the time, let alone the energy, to engage in a formal business planning process, let alone have the time to track and measure results against whatever goals you might have otherwise established. So Ryan's challenge to me was to develop a presentation that would provide a simple and clear pathway that our practices could adopt in order to assist in bringing the discipline of business planning to life. And we thought the topic, as Ryan noted earlier, that was particularly timely given the fact that we are kind of wrapping up 2014 and we're setting our sights on the new year. As Ryan mentioned, I've been working on the consulting side with private practices for many years, and during that time I've been able to observe what I would term best practices from a business perspective. And based on that experience, there is no question that on my short list of key success factors is a commitment on the part of practice leadership, and it's not just the physician, but it's the physician and administrative leadership, to a disciplined approach to planning that engages key stakeholders in the process. And some of what I'll share with you today is my own experiences in running a small company. We have about 40 employees at BSM, and we have engaged in a very consistent and rigorous process for many, many years. And it's, I believe, one of the things that's really helped us to be successful. And the other thing that I want to mention is when we have worked with practices, one of the other things that I want to point out in advance is that our better performing practices, not only are they good on the front end kind of planning side, but they're also very good on the execution side of the process. And I'll spend a little bit more time discussing that as we get into the meat of the presentation. You know, it's really, it's fine for one to develop a plan, but really, again, what separates good from the great is the ability to execute against that which the team is set out to achieve. So with all of that said, I have one objective for today, and that is I want to give you a roadmap with a user's guide that's going to hopefully assist you with the development and implementation of your plan. And I want you again, to appreciate that I will kind of weave through the formal presentation just some of my own experiences, which I think will help some of the content come alive. In fact, we at BSM just finished this past September our 2015 planning meeting, and now in the November-December timeframe, we're well entrenched in the budgeting process, which is a kind of a central part of our overall strategic planning exercise. So I'm going to, just to kind of get everybody grounded, as Ryan said, I'll speak for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for Q&A and hopefully make good use of the hour. So as we kick things off, this is really a challenge to everyone on today's call, which is to ask yourself, how much time do you really spend developing strategy or engaging in business planning? And I would tell you that from my experience, having run a small business and working with many small business owners, what I have found is, and this is true for myself, it's very difficult to actually find the time to set aside to actually think about the overall strategy and business planning process. And for myself today, I would say I spend now, because it's part of my job as a CEO and lead of a company, I probably spend between 2 and 4 hours a month that's just focus on overall business strategy. But for many of our practices, in particular our busy practice managers and clinicians, it's very difficult to find that time. So why bother? Why should I do this? What am I going to gain? What's in it for me if we go ahead and we implement a strategic plan? For me, there's a couple things that I think about that are very real for myself and for my clients. And that is, number one, the primary thing I think I take away, and there's a few kind of sub-bullets to this, but the number one thing is consensus. What this exercise does, it forces us to get all the right people in the room. And together what we do is we come up with a plan and we gain consensus around the things that matter the most to our organization. Now, some of the kind of byproducts of this is if you have the right people in the room. At BSM, what we do is all employees participate in the planning process. We go off-site. We bring the entire team together. We meet for several days. We don't meet 8-10 hours a day. We usually divide up our time such that about half of our day is spent on the formal business planning, and the other portion of the day is spent literally just enjoying one another's company. But what we get as a result of this exercise is tremendous engagement. And frankly, when you think about delivering an optimal patient experience, the best and most effective way to do that is to have employees who are truly engaged with the vision and the strategy and the goals. So we find that by having our employees involved in the planning process, we achieve tremendous engagement, which in turn, in my mind, helps us deliver a better customer experience. In addition to the kind of more, I'll say, global or general benefits, the planning process really focuses practices on addressing a number of key questions. And the first ones, to me, relate to vision and mission. And this has to do with why do we exist and essentially where are we going. So the mission is the kind of why we're here today, and the vision is where our organization's going in the future. The second thing that I find comes out of this is strategy. And when I think in terms of strategy, the key takeaway for you to think about is what makes you different, what makes you unique, what enables you to have a sustainable competitive advantage. And again, the process of planning really helps to focus the team on the strategy. Thirdly, it's goals. When we walk out of a planning meeting, we have a clear set of goals. And generally, those goals, they meet, you've probably heard of the orientation of SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant, and they're time-bound. And you'll see when we talk about the action plan that comes out of the planning process, where and how we integrate our SMART goals into our business planning process. The other thing that the planning process helps us with is what I call the tactics. What specific actions does the team need to take in order to help us achieve the goals? And part of those tactics involve assignments. Who is going to be in charge of a specific tactic? In our case, we generally will have a person, and we have found this to be most successful. You might want to be more political and say, well, we're going to have two people that are going to co-own that particular tactic. What we have found to be most effective is when we have one person who assumes ownership and responsibility for carrying out that plan. That's not to say that that person doesn't have a team of people around them supporting them, but through this process, we have clear sets of assignments. And then what this does is this helps us, if you think of this downstream, if we have overall clinic goals with clear tactics and assignments, it helps us develop both department as well as individual goals for our team members. I'm going to take the process now, and this little visual that I'm illustrating for you identifies essentially a 5-step process that we follow both when we do our own planning at BSM as well as when we help to facilitate this process with our clients. And so step one essentially is what I'll call preparation. We do a lot of data gathering on the front end. And the data gathering will include financial information. We like to look at history. So for example, when I'm in front of my team on day one of the first things I do with the team is a little history and physical, where I go back and I look at our trends over the past 5 years or 3 years, depending upon the metric. And we look at revenue, we look at profitability, we look at how we're doing compared to our budget in the current fiscal year. We look at other benchmarks of practice performance. But I put those out. It usually takes me about 20 to 30 minutes to do this overview. But that overview didn't happen by accident. It happened because we prepared well for the time that we're going to be together. You might also think about having certain key statistics around patient flow, whether it's number of patients, number of new patients, number of procedures, whether it's on certain conversion ratios, whatever is important, whatever is relevant for your business. You need to capture the main things and be able to communicate those to the team. So this is why we usually, I'd say we start our preparation for our annual planning meeting generally about 60 days prior to the actual meeting itself, because there's a lot of work to do. Other information that you may find is useful for you to gather so that you have a good baseline assessment of how you're doing. Might include patient surveys, staff surveys, referring physician surveys. And one of the things that we also do when we facilitate for clients this process is I like to know what the owner physicians and sometimes other key stakeholders, what they feel are some of the critical issues facing the clinic, what may be critical issues facing a particular doctor, what they hope to gain from the strategic planning process, what they perceive their priorities to be. And I'm also interested in knowing what level of work commitment that I can anticipate from the providers in subsequent year or years. And the reason for that is because part of the exercise of the strat plan is building what I'll call a business plan. And the business plan includes a forecast of revenue and expenses. And when you think about revenue in an aesthetics practice or any kind of medical practice, that revenue is a function of the business plan of the individual doctors. Yes, there are passive income streams that may come from retail, may come from surgical centers, may come from research, but oftentimes the primary revenue driver is the provider. And so it's important for me to know in advance what level of work commitment I can expect from a particular doctor or from each doctor. Part of the preparation, again, we're looking at historical patterns, year-over-year differences, comparisons to benchmarks. Some of you compare to external benchmarks. In our case at BSM, we do comparison. We do what's called internal benchmarking because we don't necessarily have a lot of good external business benchmarks that are relevant for our consulting practice. What we tend to do is focus more on internal benchmarking. And here we're looking at perhaps some of the same key metrics that you're looking at in your business, but we're primarily comparing them year over year. For example, we chart the revenue per full-time equivalent staff member in our practice. And we're charting that over, in this case, we've been looking at that for 25 years. And we present that every year, and I found that to be a very useful tool in helping me to evaluate, say, capacity issues for team members. It helps me evaluate, sometimes it's another measure to take a peek at staff morale. So there's various ways I use that, but I do that internal comparison and present that to the team at the start of our meetings. We do our SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and I'm going to show you an example of that, as well as a competitive analysis here in just a moment. So with a SWOT analysis, we're focused on, as I mentioned, the S is the strengths, and here we're interested in knowing what we're good at, what we perceive that we're good at, because part of strategic planning is you want to leverage your strengths. You want to establish opportunities that leverage strengths, that minimize your weaknesses. So it's very important. So for example, these might be some of the things that you might otherwise come up with as a list of strengths. By the same token, there may be some weaknesses, whether it's the aging of providers, whether it's the balance sheet issues, high expenses, whatever they may otherwise be, and of course they're going to vary by practice. And by the way, when we're doing this exercise, we do it, with whiteboard or sheets of paper, and the team is actively involved in this. Since we've been doing it every year for many, many years, we find this exercise relatively easy for us. When we get to a meeting, we may put up the previous year's SWOT, and I may challenge the team to say, have we actually made progress in overcoming some of those weaknesses? Or have we implemented opportunities that might help us to neutralize some of the threats that we otherwise perceive facing us? So this exercise is an excellent way to ground the team prior to getting into the opportunities and or the tactics which may flow from some of the opportunities that we want to proceed with. The other thing that I think is important is to be able to take an objective view of where the practice stands in, say, relationship to competitors. And this is just an example, and I'll just mention here that for Ryan's benefit, since he's listening and taking good notes, that we can certainly provide you tools and templates that we can make available on the Etna website or on the BSM website, for that matter, that you can use to help facilitate the planning process, and this would be another example. So in the final part of preparation, we're organizing information that we're going to present to, in this case, the physician owners. And these are the kinds of things that we find useful. When you're summarizing information, you don't want to get overwhelmed with detail. You do want to have details available because, trust me, someone will ask you for the backup detail, but you want to use visuals. I find that to be particularly helpful for the team, graphs, things of that nature. Then you're moving on to the actual meeting phase. And I recommend that you want to set a meeting location where you minimize distractions, and you want to set aside an appropriate amount of time, and you may even think about planning some type of retreat. As I mentioned, we go off-site. We go to a different location every year. We make it a very special occasion for our team, and I will tell you, our team very much looks forward to these meetings. When they get there, they're very motivated, they are very engaged, and they, as a result, are very active and very excellent participants in our sessions. It's a formula that's worked for us. I'm not necessarily recommending it because, of course, there's a cost associated with it. But I want you to know that I don't view it as an expense of BSM. I view it as an investment. And the return on that investment, albeit is difficult to kind of measure specifically, is reflected in our margins, and it's reflected in the success of our company. And again, we have found it to be extremely helpful. Another key issue is the who should attend. And this is going to vary depending upon your needs, but certainly for consideration, you'd have your owners, you'd have your clinic manager, you could very well have the entire team depending upon the size of the organization and what your agenda is. One of the questions I get is, should we bring employed doctors? I have a client that comes to Arizona to meet with me every year. They bring the owner doctors. They also bring their employed doctors that are not owners because they believe it's a great way to get them engaged and get them educated. Whether you use an outside moderator, that is entirely up to you. We do kind of our own. Many of my practices do their own, and we just basically give them the toolkit to figure out, to rather implement these things. But in some cases, an outside moderator can prove helpful. Here's a sample of an agenda that you might want to work off of. And again, I'm more than happy to give you a sample agenda, but it's pretty straightforward. And our agenda, by the way, this is what it looks like over a period of 3 days. And we're obviously spending a fair amount of quality time on different aspects of this. But this is what it will typically look like, and you can see the pathway to where we're going to get to. We always begin our meetings with the end in mind. We know exactly where we want to end up in terms of the key initiatives we're going to focus on. We talk about task assignment, and we quickly, following that meeting, move into kind of our execution mode. So success for us, have a facilitator, a capable facilitator that can lead the discussion, control the agenda, allow discussion on the various aspects of the agenda, but be sure that you stay on topic and stay on time. Have someone, and it doesn't have to be the facilitator. You could have someone who's recording decisions and assignments. I find for myself that it's difficult to facilitate while also recording decisions and assignments, although I end up doing that with many of my clients. It can be challenging, so you may want to assign someone specifically to do that. And then following the meeting, do a meeting summary. So I try to, within 48 hours to 72 hours of our meeting, I'll generally send a summary with some of the key decisions and assignments, and I begin to set expectations on when we'll have our action plan to follow. So the decisions that you make during those meetings, because again, this is a strategic meeting, so these are the types of strategic issues that might be under consideration. They might involve expansion or contraction of services. Maybe they're operational in nature. We, for example, this past year, in 2013, one of our key strategic initiatives for 2014 was to restructure our IT and technology support team. We decided to move all of our applications to the cloud. We decided to rebuild all of our applications. It was definitely a strategic decision, so it doesn't necessarily have to be customer-facing. It might involve providers or adding providers, whether they be non-physician providers, other doctors, could be location expansion. It could be a movement of an existing office to a new location. Could be market positioning, could be marketing in general. These are the general categories that we would normally focus on in making kind of the key strategic decisions. Then there's the written plan. And the written plan that follows for us and for all of the clients we work with is very simple. Many people look at the concept of a strategic plan and they freak out thinking that they're going to have to write some long-winded document. I have news for you. No one's going to read those long-winded documents. We're all busy. So our actual written plans become kind of a one-page document that literally has the strategy, the goals that we're going to focus on under that strategy, and then for each one of the goals, there's a certain number of tactics, and then next to that would be the assigned leader, perhaps the team, the time certain within which we want that tactic achieved, and then usually on our plan we have a section for notes, and we keep the plan dynamic so that it's updated on a regular basis. So these are the kinds of things that we would typically include, and of course there may be budget implications, And we won't reflect that on the action plan, but that will be reflected in the budget. And we do our strat plans, again, towards the end of the year, so it fits into our budgeting, because some of the things we want to do obviously have budget implications. And then there's the implementation side. So delegation is key. We're all busy, and we need to get key stakeholders involved in helping us with implementation. We have regular reporting. We have project budgets that feed up to the total business or practice budget, and then we monitor. So for us, the monitoring kind of takes place with two things. One is reporting. So when we report each month of the subsequent year, whether this is a financial statement or whether it's a benchmark report or some other dashboard report, we're presenting our actual results as compared to our goals or targets. So part of the measurement that's key to strategic planning is the measurement piece. So if it is that you want to focus on improving your conversion, lead conversion ratio, for example, or your consult to surgical, for example, you want to know what your baseline data is. You want to establish goals. You want to measure how you're doing, and you need to be able to report that in some simple and easy-to-read dashboard so that it can be reported at the doctor meetings. And if there's aberrancies, if you're, everything is great and you're performing positive to plan, fantastic. If you see aberrancies, the purpose of regular and frequent reporting is once you identify the aberrancies, that you can identify what the causal factors of those may be, and you can provide intervention to make sure we get back on track to achieving those goals. And then, of course, part of implementation is repeating that process on a regular basis. So as we wrap up this portion of the webinar, I want to just summarize a few key success factors. And the first and probably most important factor is strong leadership from our doctors and our administrative leaders. The team will take their cue from you. So if they believe you value this and this is important to you and to the organization, people are more likely to be engaged. You can't just delegate this to someone. This requires hands-on support and leadership from the top down. And when you communicate that, and you communicate that it's that important, you will be amazed at how engaged people will be in the process. As I mentioned, one of the key aspects of this is gaining consensus. When you leave your planning meetings, everyone has to be on the same page, and everyone has to be motivated that this is where we're going as an organization. One of the key responsibilities of leaders is to be able to communicate effectively a vision for where you want to take your business. People want to be led. People want to be on a winning team. And when they see this and they see how motivated you are, more likely than not, you will not have difficulty gaining consensus among the key stakeholders. And you'll note that I do use the term stakeholders, not necessarily shareholders. Yes, shareholders are part of the stakeholder group, but frankly, everyone who works in your business has a stake in the future of your organization. That's why we engage all stakeholders at BSM in the process. Communication. So once you finish up the meeting, the process really, you're moving on to the next phase, which I call implementation or execution. And as I said at the beginning of the webinar, what we have seen as a key success factor with our practices is the ability to execute and execute effectively. And that takes discipline, planning, action plans, communication with staff. Because if you leave the meeting, and let's assume the staff was engaged, and the staff doesn't hear anything for 90 days or 120 days, they tend to kind of lose interest and then question, well, maybe the leadership wasn't that motivated, or maybe they didn't think the things that we spoke about at our meeting were that critical to us. And you lose your momentum, and you can lose your people. And again, if we think about why people stay working in an organization, if we think about how you achieve low turnover, a lot of it comes back to people believing in the path that our leaders are taking them down. So communication becomes key to that. Proper alignment of economic incentives between physicians and staff. We all talk about incentive programs, but I question how many of our practices effectively use incentive programs, both economic and non-economic. Here I'm focused on economic, but how many of them use financial incentive programs as an effective management tool? So at BSM, our incentive program, which has been the same plan we've had for 30 years, is all tied to company profitability. And if you think about company profitability, it's a function of how we manage top line, it's a function of how we manage overhead to create a very efficient operation. Efficiency, the ability to take a dollar that comes into the top of the funnel and look at what percentage of that dollar that came in the top of the funnel is actually paid out in profitability. So what we try to do is align our staff incentives with our bottom line, and we have found that to be very effective. I'm not suggesting that everybody run out and do that, but you have to address the question of what's in it for me. If you come out of a planning meeting and you dump a lot of new work on the staff and there's nothing in it for them, then you should not expect a change in behavior. It's just human nature. But what we do is we try to rally our team around an incentive program such that when we do achieve the goals we agree to in our planning sessions, that everyone wins. So that is probably a topic for another day, Ryan. But for today, I just want to point out to you that this is an important aspect of strategic planning. And one of the last elements is accountability and measurement. This is where I think many of our practices really struggle, and that is they don't set measurable goals, or if they do, they don't establish proper accountability measures. And the accountability needs to be team-based. It shouldn't be just, oh, it's accountable to the manager, or it's the accountability to the doctor. You have to create a culture and an environment where people are personally accountable for the success of the organization. And again, that doesn't happen accidentally. But when you find that sauce, when you find that secret sauce, is when you know you have people effectively engaged and doing much of your job for you. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Ryan, I'll turn it back over to you, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Bruce, thanks so much for sharing that. And I want to just reinforce for the audience here really quickly as we go into the Q&A section that the way that you will pose questions to us right now is to pop open that questions panel on the right-hand side of your screen, start typing those in, and as those questions come in, I'll be filtering those and posing those over to Bruce. Excuse me. As you type in, we have a couple questions that have come in already, and I want to ask you the first, Bruce. And I think this is actually something that a lot of people probably have on their mind. This attendee asks, he says, Bruce, it's obviously a lot easier when most of your employees are consultants. In a medical practice, other than the administrator, almost nobody on my team understands the words strategy or plan or what they entail. So I think there's both an opportunity here to maybe reset an understanding of how your business is staffed and composed. Yes. But then to dive into and talk a little bit about your experiences with practices where you have administrators on the front line, you have receptionists for whom these processes will be new.
Yes, that's a great question. So first of all, as it relates to BSM, of our 40 employees that are they're W-2 employees of the company, 75% of those employees are actually support team members. So we have about 11 consultants on our team, and the balance are staff. And I think I'll answer the second part of that question by telling you exactly what I do and exactly what I recommend. I invest a tremendous amount of time in education, and I do so because I believe it is so important to educate team members as to the important role and stake they play in the business. So I provide articles, At our regular staff meetings, I spend a fair amount of time stopping, going over benchmarks, talking about strategy. When we do our strat plan meetings, the first part of the meeting, I always level set everybody on why are we doing this? Why is it important to you sitting in the room? Because if I cannot answer that question, then why should I be there? So the answer is that it's hard to do. And so if I were sitting, Ryan, to use your example, if I were an administrator or a practice manager and I were relatively new in the position or lacked the experience, my best advice to you would be to get educated. We can provide a couple of articles, Ryan, that I think would be helpful in that regard, because this is not a discipline. If you've not been to and gotten an MBA or been to business school, this is not necessarily a discipline you would know how to do. You know, our doctors, for example, are exceptionally bright people, but they don't know what they don't know. And for those that are on the phone, many of you would kind of nod your head in agreement and saying, Bruce, I never had exposure to this. So whether you're a physician, whether you're a practice manager, whether you're experienced or new to this role, I think you need to educate yourself. And then one of the most important things is when you're learning is teach others. So if it were me, and this is something that I really felt was important, I'd get myself educated. I would get buy-in and consensus from the doctors that this is something that I think would be really important for the business for the long term. To the extent that there's buy-in, then I need to get myself to the point where I could educate the team and hopefully bring the team along. And what we have found is our youngest people in our organization are the most enthusiastic. They think this is the greatest thing because they've never heard or seen this before. But then the process is such a positive one that it's highly motivating, and then it inspires them to want to learn more.
You know, and Bruce, hopefully you won't mind me sharing. I actually had the great honor this year of having the chance to witness and in a small way participate in BSM's own planning session. And what I saw in that experience was everyone from the receptionist up to Bruce himself really was focused on what the company needed and wanted to do in the coming year to further its success. And certainly this is one of those things where people might be asking, well, aren't there going to be people who really don't participate in that way, or they aren't really good at those things? And those people there may be people on your staff who don't have a lot to contribute, but their contribution will happen afterwards when they get back to the office, and they carry with them that understanding of and the commitment to what your practice is working toward, and they're supporting that mission, they're supporting that goal every day. Bruce, I think maybe the next, go ahead.
Could I add one more comment, though? I think it's relevant because it's instructive. To help bridge the gap, one of the things we do that Ryan observed, and we do this regularly in our planning meetings, once we've agreed by the morning of day 2 on kind of some of the key strategies we're going to focus on, we form teams. And we spend the better part of our second day and third day of the meeting where the teams go off and they work on that particular, so we have assigned teams. So say we want to work on, I'll just use your world, a patient wait time issue. You might have a team that goes off and works on that particular issue. Then you might have 3 or 4 key topics. So we take our groups, usually we have about 5 groups. Those groups go off and they actually work on developing the strategy and the plan for that particular initiative. And then they come back on the 3rd day of our meeting and they present their findings and recommendations back to the entire group. And that really, to me, bridges the gap that you're alluding to, Ryan. It gets every person in the room engaged because these are small work teams and it's hard to hide. And they don't want to hide. they want to be involved.
Exactly. Yeah, I think especially your younger staff, your millennials, they want to shine. They want to stand out.
Yep.
So one of the questions that came up here next, Bruce, had to do with what you were talking about at the very end of the presentation there about non-financial incentives. Can you give examples for the audience today a little bit about the non-financial incentives?
Yes. So the non-financial incentives generally start with behavior. And what I mean by that is non-financial incentive means something as basic as showing gratitude, expressing your gratitude for a job well done. I hear repeatedly, from clinics, practices that I work in that, the doctor never says thank you, or, they don't seem to appreciate what we're doing for them. So to incentivize in a non-financial way, it starts with just attitude and behavior and demonstrating and showing appreciation. beyond that, the things that we do that I think are really helpful, that really motivate people to want to be part of our organization, is we do a lot of little things, and they revolve around teamwork, and they revolve around the topic of education. We have something at BSM called Be Smart, which is B, S-M-A-R-T, but they use the BSM acronym in the title of it's a book club. And it's been really successful, and they choose particular books, and the team reads them, and you're not obligated to participate, but they've done Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, they've done John Miller's QBQ, they've done a whole host of books, and that's very stimulating for people, and they really enjoy that. We do a lot of things to support continuing education of our team members, and we also encourage a lot of our consultants to take the time to educate our team members around the things that they do in the ordinary course of their work. And we do a lot of team building activities, and we find that a lot of that really just helps to create a work environment that people want to be in. And all of those things obviously comprise one's culture, but we have a very, a culture. Look, we're not perfect, and just like any organization, we have our warts and dimples, but we work hard to create a culture that really motivates people. So those are the things we do that are kind of non-financial, and then we do other things, but those are the main things we do that have been quite helpful for us.
So looking at, I think the next one comes in, this is coming from practice administrator Bruce, who's in a situation that I've certainly seen before. The practice is successful almost despite itself, right? So financially things are going well. Operationally, structurally, they're having a lot of issues, staff resistance to change to fix those issues. What tips would you share in helping to move, and I think this kind of specifically, how do we move the doctors to a place where they agree? It's worth it for us to take a little, to acknowledge fact, yeah, finances are good, operations could be better, to take time out to make an investment in a strategic planning process, when it may not feel, with the checks coming in, like they need to.
Yeah, and that is one of the big challenges for all of us to overcome. When things are good and the business is doing well, why should we bother doing this? So really, to me, it comes back to, this is the issue of leadership. It really comes back to understanding what it means to build a winning organization and a winning team that is going to sustain itself into the future. And we can, and in medicine in particular, where our margins have been historically pretty good, complacency can definitely set in. So what I have found is most helpful, again, is educating the principals, and that could be an article about, I'll give you an example of that. I have a big group that I'm working with now, Ryan, that we're going through some leadership succession issues, and basically there was general complacency around, well, everything's working fine now, why bother? And so I felt like I needed to take the time to kind of educate some of the leaders of the organization about why it's important to invest in these things. So I sent them a couple of articles. I recommended a couple of books for them to read. One of the articles I had them read had to do with what makes for a great leader. It was a dated piece. It was actually from the Harvard Business Review from 1998. The author's name was Goldman, G-O-L-M-A-N, and the author writes about the importance of emotional intelligence. And I got a beautiful note back from one of the doctors who said, this was what I needed to see, this is what I needed to hear, because this is the stuff I'm not particularly good at. Yet I realize that as a business owner, I have an obligation to lead. I just don't know how to do it. And I really just didn't understand fully why these things were that important. So I think the answer is always about educating people, because unless they get it, then they're never going to really buy into it. And I just don't need them, Ryan, to go through the motions. I need to actually get engaged emotionally. And certainly I believe in that, because I believe that the key, as I said probably towards the beginning of the presentation, if you want to deliver a fantastic patient experience, the key to that is having a staff that is totally engaged. And so now if you follow that thought train logically, how do I create an engaged staff? The answer to that is you involve them, you include them in this process. And there's nothing accidental about the best of the best practices. There's nothing accidental about delivering a great patient experience. So to me, it comes, if you just follow the logic of that, then you understand what it takes to create an engaged group of employees to deliver that great experience, therein lies your answer.
So I've got two questions, and they carry some of the same ideas forward, and they're closely related. Let me ask you the first of them. One of our audience members today, it really looks at the idea of commitment on the part of the individuals who tackle those tasks, whether those individuals are staff members or MDs. Mm-hmm. And they're asking you, what do you do to enforce that commitment, the thing that they agreed to handle and lead, if they're not performing, if they're not following through, especially if the person who's not following through is the doctor owner of a practice?
That's obviously a little bit more difficult.
let's start with the staff member, and
yes, I'll work my way to the doctor.
Enforcing accountability.
Yeah. So accountability comes back to really the basics of effective people management. So this is where it starts with the culture, the environment. We have used at BSM a book. And Ryan, you've heard us talk about this book.
It's a great book.
We have had to tackle, just like any small company, the issue of accountability. And so the book is called QBQ, and the author's name is John Miller. We use QBQ as an integral part of all of our employee onboarding and staff development. They have to learn the concept of asking better questions. So QBQ stands for question behind the question. And we have found that that has helped tremendously in encouraging and supporting a culture of accountability. Now, that still leaves open the fact that you can have a person who maybe had a particular set of responsibilities or a task that's not doing their job. It becomes much easier because it becomes fairly visible. If you have a plan and a document that's been kind of published, and so is responsible for implementing something, and they're not, it becomes pretty clear that they're not, and that means that there's going to be a conversation that's going to take place, an effective conversation, where maybe the initial conversation is it's just a reminder, and because maybe the person has had a rough day, a rough week, something going on at home, and so you always want to give that individual the benefit of the doubt, but there has to be some indication that we're moving in a positive or forward direction, and this has just happened to us, so I understand the importance of this. At some point in time, the culture that you have, that you essentially are enforcing, is going to help you to manage that person in or out. And you're going to give them a fair chance to be accountable, because that's what we want ultimately, is for the person to get on board. But to the extent that they're not, and it is a chronic problem, that may ultimately result in managing that person out. So that's why I made the comment I did before, a little harder with your owner doctor. So in that case, to me, it comes back to education. If we have this plan and the doctor's truly committed, and I find that to keep my doctor, or doctors kind of tied into the plan, I find education and frequent reporting back to them of progress that we're making. They have to believe that this process is working. This is the art of how do you manage up effectively. When I say manage up, if I'm the manager, how do I manage up to my doctors most effectively? And there's an art and a science to doing that. And I find if you do that and do that well, then you tend to not have as many occurrences of the doctor not honoring a commitment he or she may have made.
So a question that came up that kind of, I think, relates to that, but maybe preceded a little bit is, especially in multi-group, multi-doctor practices, you have scenarios where people approach this strategic planning meeting with agendas. They have their personal things that they hope to see achieved in the coming years. How do you moderate the impacts of individuals with a strong personal agenda in this effort to build consensus? What advice do you have there?
what I have found most effective, because I've certainly been involved in those instances where I'm facilitating and there could be multiple owners, and one or more of those owners may have his or her own agenda. Remember earlier in the presentation I talked about the importance of surveys and the importance of getting information or data points in advance, and one of those data points was individual agenda items. I want to know those things in advance, and so what I do in my role, if I'm facilitating or one of my team members is facilitating, is I have actually one-on-one conversations with those doctors so that I better understand their issues, and then I coach them to success, meaning I coach them to, I totally appreciate why that is an important issue for you. I'm going to ask you to trust me that, I am going to address that issue, assuming, Ryan, I think it's appropriate to address the issue. There are some agendas that are not appropriate to address within the context of that, say, planning meeting. This is why I also talked about the fact that you need to know what's the purpose of the meeting before you determine who should be in the meeting. If I sense there are several agenda items, personal agenda items, I might actually say we need a partners-only meeting and we need to address those issues or topics in a more transparent way before we ever see the light of day with a team meeting around strategy, right? Because I can't afford to have that meeting derailed. So I'm going to manage that prophylactically by doing survey, by doing phone discussion or face-to-face discussion. I figure out what the issue is, and then I figure out the best way to manage that. And I might be saying to that individual partner, this is not the time nor the place, and I would strongly advise you that we should not bring up that topic at that meeting. That's not the right place. However, I might say, we do need to address that issue in a partner meeting. Or I might go to the managing partner if it's a big enough group and say to the managing partner, you have an issue that you need to manage involving one of your partners.
Yeah. So as we come up here at the end of the hour, and Bruce, I know you've got to run to catch a flight as well, I just want to close with a couple of points. One, I sincerely want to thank you. It was very generous of you to give of your time to all of those people who participated today and all of those who will watch this in recording. So Bruce, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
And at the same time, for those that are on the call, just to reinforce that we have been recording today's event. We will be over the next, sometime in the next week and a half, processing the recording and placing in our Learning Center. Bruce had mentioned that he was willing to share in the middle of the event some tools and templates. I'll talk to him about grabbing those. I'll also reference, I think, one of the book titles that we mentioned there at the end, which is QBQ. All of those resources will be available on the page in our Learning Center that we set up following this event, where you can watch the recording. So we'll make those assets available to everybody who's registered for today's event. And again, please be patient. We have a holiday coming up, so it may take as long as 10 days for us to get that online. So again, Bruce, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who participated in today's call. We wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving.